President Trump facing growing criticism over his decision to fire former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
There are more reports emerging today that President Trump and Bolton were especially at odds over how to deal with Iran.
President Trump reportedly considered easing sanctions in order to get a meeting with Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, while Bolton was against the idea. Former Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon said Trump's decision to fire Bolton showed weakness and was a victory for Tehran.
Looking to what had happened in the last couple of months. In one hand, Trump was very tough, imposing crippling sanctions, very important. Declarations, very important. But ignoring the fact that the Iranians intercepted American UAV. It was a signal of weakness. They understand that Trump doesn't want to go all the way to confront them. He is now on the way to engage them. That's why he fired John Bolton. That's bad news for, I believe, Israel.
All right, to discuss the growing fallout, we're joined by Claudia Rose, Senior Policy Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Claudia, welcome. This is a situation where a prominent Israeli seems to be in agreement with Iran that Bolton's firing is a victory for Tehran. Would you agree with former Defense Minister and former IDF Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon that the Trump administration is starting to show weakness against Iran?
Unfortunately, yeah, because we really need, this is a long-running, really difficult problem with Iran, and no deal, there's a big question about whether any deal can work. I think that's doubtful, but the only way a deal can work is if they do it basically out of fear that if they don't do it, their regime will actually be pressured to the point where it collapses. Otherwise, what lies ahead is a replay at some level of what we had under President Obama, which was a terrible deal, very beneficial to Iran. And President Trump was, credit him, he was right to pull out of it. As we say, he should not go back into something like that.
Claudia, Bloomberg reporting that President Trump discussed easing sanctions on Iran to help secure this meeting or a possible meeting with Hassan Rouhani, perhaps at the UNGA, forcing Bolton to argue forcefully against such a move. So the question is, should the president even consider easing sanctions while we see Iran taking more aggressive steps to further come out of compliance with the JCPOA?
He should not. I mean, I can understand why he wants to do it. There are enormous political considerations in any democracy where he's trying to be, he wants to be able to say, we've gotten somewhere with this. And the problems in Iran were left to run by so many of his predecessors, as like North Korea, that it's now this simply enormous problem. How do you reverse all this? Yeah, he's in a terrible spot, but the right response is not to now start looking for a deal or going soft. That does play into Iran's hands.
And the White House has repeatedly reportedly started preparations for both Trump and President Rouhani to meet perhaps in New York while the UN General Assembly is meeting this month. The president has said he'll meet with no preconditions. But realistically, Claudia, should there be some sort of assurances or preconditions for such a meeting to take place?
Well, I wouldn't trust them. So the preconditions don't really worry me. What concerns me is that I don't think anything good would come out of a meeting. Remember that when President Rouhani was in New York for the General Assembly opening 6 years ago, there was all the speculation, would President Obama meet with him? And President Obama phoned him as he was leaving town, which was a bad idea in itself. And basically, it's the U.S. sort of giving in to what is fundamentally nuclear blackmail. And that's a terrible precedent for the modern world. It's dangerous for the U.S. It's very dangerous for Israel. It's dangerous basically for any free nation. So really not a good idea. It's not going to lead to greater peace or disarmament. It's a step toward bringing Iran back to a table where they have the asymmetric advantage that if the U.S. cuts a deal, it's bound to abide by it. When Iran cuts a deal, it isn't. And remember, the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump pulled out of, President Obama never submitted to the U.S. Senate for a treaty and constitutional process. He just took it to the UN. So that was not a treaty as U.S. law understands it.
All right, Claudia Rosette, we have to leave it right there. We thank you so much for your time.